I remember being part of a group coaching program, and every now and again, we would get birthday wishes that would come up, and it would be a meme with something saying happy birthday. And I remember it was a few weeks or maybe even months before my birthday, and somebody got a white person got a card, the meme that said happy birthday, but it was a gorilla. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I hope this is not what they're going to use for me when that time comes.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. I've been on a break since mid-December, and it's great to be back now that the kids are back in school after the summer break. I have missed being here, but I have really enjoyed the unplanned, let me put it that way. Let me really be transparent with you. The unplanned long break. I was planning to take a short-ish break and come back around about, early to mid-Jan. But my daughter asked me a question. She said, Mom, do you still need to release your podcast over the holidays? And I was like, yes, my community needs me. They need my support. And so I need to keep showing up. But after giving it some thought, I decided to take the break. And this was very much in line with my own recommendations from my very last episode in 2025 of the podcast, where I was talking about and centering rest. And so it feels so good to be back. Now, I had a different episode recorded for my return in 2026. But after news unfolded over the weekend about the depiction of Barack and Michelle Obama as apes, well, I just couldn't stay silent about it. We are living in a moment where dehumanizing language is becoming more visible, it's becoming more casual, and in many spaces, more accepted. We're hearing it in political commentary. We're seeing it in memes, watching it circulate online, often dismissed as being humorous, being satire, or people simply saying what they think. Freedom of speech. And what concerns me most is not just where this language is coming from, but hear me when I say this. What concerns me is about how often it is often left unchecked, left unchallenged. And so today, I want to have a deep dive. I want us to go deep into understanding where dehumanizing language comes from, what history shows us about its impact, and why those of us who lead, coach, teach, or hold influence have a responsibility to intervene early. So, what do we mean by dehumanizing language? It's language that strips people of their full humanity. It does this by comparing people to animals, vermin, objects, or by portraying them as less intelligent, less civilized, less worthy of care or dignity. This kind of language centers distance, and distance makes harm easier. Political theorist Hannah Arendt wrote about how harm becomes normalized not through extreme villains, but through ordinary people like you and me who stop seeing others as fully human. She called this the banality of evil. Psychologist Albert Bandura described this process as moral disengagement. When language changes our senses of responsibility, it changes with it, and history shows us this pattern again and again. So let's talk about the origin and history of dehumanizing language. So during European colonization and the transatlantic slave trade, African people were routinely described as animals, beasts, savages, or biologically inferior. In the US, enslaved people were regarded as three-fifths of a human, justifying their enslavement. And even here in Australia, our First Nations people were regarded less than the flora and the fauna. This language was intentional and it was essential. If a group is seen as less than human, exploitation can be framed as necessary, as benevolent. The scriptures in the Bible were twisted and used to perpetuate the hate and enslavement of Africans. The harm here was not only physical, it was psychological, it was generational and enduring. And for those doing the harm, this language created moral distance. It allowed violence to exist alongside a sense of, get this, righteousness. And we see this again in the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, Jewish people were portrayed as rats, parasites, and disease carriers in Nazi propaganda. The imagery did not appear after violence began. No, it came first. So by the time extermination camps existed, the language had already done its work. Killing had been framed as cleansing. Then in 1994, during the Rwandan genocide, Tutsi people were repeatedly referred to as cockroaches on radio broadcasts. Ordinary neighbors were conditioned to see other human beings as pests to be eliminated. And again, language came before mass violence. Are you seeing the pattern here? In other words, dehumanizing language became a weapon of mass destruction. Fast forward to more recent history here in Australia, Adam Goodes, an AFL legend, had a banana thrown at him during a match. An act drawing on a long history of equating Black people with animals. What followed was just as telling. Much of the public conversation focused on whether he overreacted, whether he should have ignored it, or whether he was, get this, too sensitive. The harm itself was quickly sidelined, so now the focus became on his reaction. And more recently, we have seen Barack Obama and Michelle Obama portrayed as apes on Truth Social, even though the imagery was taken down several hours later, the harm was already done. I know you know this is not new symbolism. It's a centuries-old racist trope. What is new is how casually it circulates and how often it is defended as political commentary or blamed on someone else. The avoidance of responsibility and accountability here is telling. So, what's the impact of dehumanizing language? For those targeted, the impact is cumulative. Research by Claude Steele shows that environments where people feel dehumanized or stereotyped lead to withdrawal, it leads to silence and psychological stress. People stop participating, they stop trusting and bringing their full selves into spaces, and often they just leave altogether. For those who dehumanizing language is what they're using, especially when it goes unchecked, something else happens. There's reinforcement. They become emboldened. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo spoke extensively about how behavior escalates when accountability is absent. When no one intervenes, people are emboldened. The behavior often becomes more extreme, not less. Get that. It doesn't become less. It becomes more and more extreme because here the envelope is being pushed further and further. And for people and everyone else watching, a lesson is learned about what is acceptable. And so, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where these things have been so normalized? This is where the pyramid of white supremacy is a useful framework. And this is something I share extensively inside my program, Represented. And I'd like you to Google the pyramid so you can have it as a visual. At the bottom of the pyramid are things often dismissed as harmless. So things like jokes, memes, stereotypes, just humor. That's what they're referred to. Because these arts are not violent. They are often tolerated. I was just kidding. But when behavior at the bottom is normalized, get this, it creates the conditions for what sits above it. And what sits above it is things like discrimination, harassment, exclusion. And at the top of the pyramid, acts of violence, genocide, ethnic cleansing, something you may be familiar with in the current times. But please, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every joke leads to directly genocide. The point I'm trying to drive home here is that harm escalates when early warning signs are ignored. Now, what does this have to do with coaching and personal development? A lot, actually. The coaching industry likes to see itself as progressive, inclusive, and being conscious. And in many ways, it is trying, but it's also not immune to history. When ape or gorilla imagery is used in reference to Black people, even in supposedly light-hearted ways, it draws directly from this long history of dehumanization. I remember being part of a group coaching program, and every now and again we would get birthday wishes that would come up, and it would be a meme with something saying happy birthday. And I remember it was a few weeks or maybe even months before my birthday, and somebody got a white person got a card, the meme that said happy birthday, but it was a gorilla. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I hope this is not what they're going to use for me when that time comes. So these things do exist. And sometimes a lot of people who are running these programs don't even realize it. They just think it's fun. It's cool, but it's not. So when harm is minimized with phrases like that wasn't the intention or it was just a joke, the same patterns we're seeing now repeat themselves. And this matters deeply in coaching spaces because coaches shape culture. We set the norms. We decide what gets named and what gets ignored in our spaces. Research professor Brene Brown has spoken about dehumanization as a way people opt out of accountability. When we reduce people to labels or objects, empathy erodes. Leadership, she reminds us, is revealed not through what we say we value, but through what we tolerate. Psychologist Gordon Allport also showed that prejudice escalates when it is not interrupted. Silence is not necessarily playing it safe. And I know there are many times when people are just silent, they're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I just don't want to add to this conversation and get it wrong. But get me when I say this, silence is instructive. And this statement, this just sitting with this work from Gordon Allport, it's just something that has made me more aware because there are many times when I've chosen silence. And maybe you have too. So, what can we do? Well, first, we call it out. And now, if you've been listening to me for some time and you know my theory around this work, there are many, many, many times I advocate for calling in, but truly, this is not one of those times. And let this serve as an example of when to call out. We name behavior clearly. We do not soften language to protect or comfort the person who has said it. And we say that this is unacceptable here in our space because that is an act of leadership. Second, we educate ourselves. We don't wait until harm happens in our spaces to learn why something was harmful. And we do not rely on those impacted to teach us. That's why doing this work of racial equity is essential human work. And as coaches, course creators, consultants, we don't get to opt out. As long as the world is made up of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color, it is our duty to stay informed and do the work of being inclusive. Third, we speak up within our sphere of influence. This includes our businesses, our communities, and our homes. If we are raising children, they need language for these conversations too. Silence teaches as much as speech does. And finally, there must be consequences. And this can look like removal of content, loss of access, or removal from the group space completely. Consequences are not punishments, they are there to protect the culture. So, psychological safety doesn't just happen just because you're a good person, just because you deem yourself inclusive. Psychological safety doesn't just happen. It's built through consistent, visible leadership. When people trust that harm will be addressed, they participate more fully. When they do not, they self-censor and they leave. As coaches, educators, and leaders, we are shaping microcultures every day. And those cultures either replicate harm or they interrupt it. History shows us that dehumanizing language is never harmless. It always moves somewhere. And as a leader, how can you intervene earlier rather than later? If you are a coach or online business owner who wants to hold spaces with care and responsibility, this is the work we do inside Represented. Now, I've run this program for the past over 5 years. We're getting on to round number 13, cohort number 13. And the waitlist is now open for the next round of this 10-week signature program, where we go beyond awareness and into real lived practice of racial equity in business and leadership. Head over to anigishuru.com/represented for all the details and to get on the wait list. The link, my friend, is in the show notes.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.